hyperextension position you've got yourself into, we've got a bit of both going on. We've probably loaded that nerve really fast and hard, and that's giving it a bit of a tug. Essentially, knowingly, the surgeons that were using the replacements were finding that patients were getting septicemia.
And that's off the back of the hip replacement?
So they essentially gave them a choice of different implants that they could have, and they were noticing higher than usual levels of septicemia. It was actually flagged by British doctors because they were using the same implants. But in the States, essentially what they were doing is they realised that the levels of septicemia post-operation were going up. But some of those consultants were on the board at deploy and continue to use the implants.
Really?
Yeah.
Are they still using them today? Or
no, they've been, FDA approval was removed. But essentially they carried on knowing that there was the higher risk because essentially there was financial reward for it.
Okay, so off the back of that then, how could you prevent someone from getting septicemia following surgery?
Well, I mean, it's rare to start with. I mean, it's hugely rare. But the complications of surgery, there's always a percentage of things that do happen. It's just the way it is. Firstly, having implants that don't give you those kind of things is first and foremost. But secondly, being in the best possible health that you can be pre-op. Unfortunately, some people that end up down that route, who certainly have traumatic falls and then have to have a hip replacement, are not in particularly good health in the first place. So whether it's a knee replacement surgery, an ACL, whatever, prehab is such a vital component because if you can build up the capacity before the surgery, it reduces the risks afterwards, and B, reduces the recovery time. And so I spend a lot of time working with patients to ensure that we can cut down the time post-op, particularly with knees. Hips, a lot of the patients that I work with hip replacements, some of them have been on waiting lists for a prolonged period of time and therefore their movement has degraded so much and they're in huge amounts of discomfort. It's meant that all of the muscle wastage is quite considerable. But for others it might be a traumatic incident, they've had a fall and they've had to have emergency surgery straight away, so you don't get a lot of notice. But if you do have an opportunity beforehand to build capacity, then it's really beneficial.
So this is actually a really interesting topic because sporadically my mum has just gone through, she's going to hate me talking about this by the way, but I won't give her name away. She has just gone through a left and right side, so double hip replacement. She had a knee replacement also, and then they had to go back to do a patella replacement because apparently these days it's not automatically a given that you get your patella replaced with the knee joint. So they had to go back and redo the patella, and the reason for that, her left hip got opened up twice because she did get septicemia, and she did get septicemia in the knee too also. She's not in the best of health, but this is like something that I've always come back to with a lot of my clients and a lot of people that I deal with, that if you manage your health first and you know what metrics to look out for, which we have done a previous video on before, that can help you better gauge what foot forward to put in place for that rehabilitational process.
Yeah, I mean, and that harks back to muscle mass. I mean, fundamentally, it's the key metric that we look for as we age. We're losing muscle mass hand over fist, high percentage numbers, particularly when we hit sort of 65, 75. And it's the one thing that is correlated to or associated to quality of life and movement more than any other factor, cardiovascular health included. So maintaining muscle mass and strength can really prevent the likelihood of joint-related concerns. Don't get me wrong, these things do happen, and it's just part of the natural aging process. But if you can maintain your muscle mass, you're going to go a long way to A, speeding up the recovery if you do have one of those, and B, preventing joint-related concerns.
Because there's a lot of research done now, and that has been published that would go from the age of 65 and upwards, and the correlation between actually being more inclined to work with resistance and also more of an even spread through the day of your protein intake to better activate and more efficiently engage muscle protein synthesis to aid with recovery and regeneration of muscle tissue. And that becomes actually more important the older you get. And weirdly, I got asked the other day, 65-year-old male, I'm starting to my skin's starting to loosen, I'm feeling like a bit more atrophy through the legs and all that kind of stuff, so what's the better thing in play? And I sat with him for an hour and talked through his diet and his nutrition, but also what he's actually doing. He's a bus driver, so he spends most of his, lives in Australia, so it's not the end of the world, but he spends most of his time on long commutes, obviously sat down, so it's a way of actually trying to implement more resistance-based training to help stimulate muscle protein synthesis, and then support that with an even spread of protein through the day, roughly aiming for about 20 grams per serving, which would stimulate that activity. Whereas in that generation and a little bit older, they're obviously, you know, more of a carb breakfast, maybe a little bit of protein at lunch, and then you get a large bolus of protein at dinner, like meat and two veg kind of generational style. But that's probably a good fun fact.
Yeah, and especially if you're in hip flexion for prolonged periods, like driving, sitting, desk-based things, it can be hugely problematic, and trying to get all of those extensor muscles engaged that are so important for walking and stability and balance. Yeah. They're the things that are anti-gravity, they're keeping us upright. So if you're constantly in flex positions, really targeted areas that we need to work on in terms of triple flexion to prevent the risk of falls, because falls are so impactful as we get older. I mean, you can lose muscle mass so fast with a period of time off your feet. All of the work that NASA did in the sort of 40s and 50s, looking at people who were non-weight bearing, has shown dramatic effects of non-weight bearing. So whether you're sitting, whether you're lying down, any period of time when you're off your feet has massive detrimental effects on not just muscle, it's bone density as well. So for someone who has to sit for prolonged periods, there are targeted things in the gym that we would look to work on, which is all of those extensor patterns, glutes, hamstrings, back extensors, that can really counteract the day-to-day grind of having to sit for 7, 8, 9, 10 hours.
I suppose you'd look at more of a pre-stretched posterior chain position through the ankle as well, because especially if I'm taking the example of a bus driver, they're spending a lot of their time in a locked dorsiflex position through the calcaneus joint. So then it would be more beneficial to actually do more of a pre-stretched plantar flexion and work through tibialis anterior to strengthen up the front of the shin.
Yeah, I mean it's not more complex than working the opposite patterns that someone is likely to be stuck in. That's different if they're moving in different ways, but certainly if they're fixed in those positions, it's trying to ensure they've got range in both ends of those motions. But particularly, I think for sitting, what that tends to do is it leaves you in a flex spinal position. So we're looking at rotational patterns, and that's not just through the spine, that's through the hip, through the ankle, the subtalar joint, as you mentioned about the ankle, is trying to build in as much rotation as possible if you get stuck in flexion, because it does tend to limit everything in terms of how we turn. Think about stability and balance. Rotation is so important for that, whether you're moving from a kitchen counter, a sink, to a chair, to getting up, to twisting and turning. So commonly it's problematic when people can't turn well.
You see a lot of that, of like transferring that into an athlete. You see a lot of dysfunction, maybe not at an elite level, because they would have had three-dimensional coaches come in and work those movement patterns with them. Yeah. But golfers, as an example, we spend a lot of time through one rotational plane, and then when you actually come and train the reverse, it actually gives them that freedom and space in the environment of the facet joints of the spine to then find more power through the glute that would work into there.
Yeah, I see it a lot, and it can be so beneficial for those types of individuals who are more sedentary to do those rotational activities like golf and tennis. But also, if you're not moving particularly well through hip internal rotation and spinal rotation, it's going to load something else more, whether that's your shoulder, you're going to use your wrist more to generate more extension because you can't fit in thoracic spine extension.
Cross-diagonal dysfunction.
Absolutely. So if you're not moving well from some area, you're going to have to compensate with something else. And if we want to generate rotational forces, what we are trying to do is even out all of those different aspects so we get that elastic recoil, the stretch shortening cycle. And so what we would look to do is identify which particular components aren't moving as well as they might be. And if we work on those, whether it's bolted onto a conditional set, when we then come to do the full movement back engaged, whether it's a golf swing, whether it's a tennis serve, what we're looking to have is smoother movement patterns and then less likelihood of irritation or dysfunction at one particular segment.
And we see this more commonly. We're going to get the segue in now. We see this really commonly as well with rugby players. So Dave, Dr. Dave Silver, finally Dr. Dave Silver, congratulations on that. PhD, he's an amazing physiotherapist. He's been my mentor for a very long time, and he's actually what got me involved, and he sent me down the three-dimensional applied functional movement science route with gait analysis, obviously not to like PhD level, but enabled me to at least rudimentarily apply certain rehabilitational aspects to their conditioning and strength-based training to stop injury or help them back from injury unless it's something more severe. And you know, I'm always one for credit where credit's due, and if you don't know, refer out, and I've been referring out to Dave for the whole time that I basically know him, because his brain's just insane. So a little bit of introduction to Dave. So Dave, tell the people about yourself.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not been a straight line journey. I started out playing rugby, as you did. I ended up playing rugby league for the London Broncos. It's quite unusual. For a lad
We know
from
each
South.
other from Cobham, by the way. Big up the Cobs.
Yeah, and I didn't have the grades to do anything in particular, but fortunately, off the back of them, they managed to get me a university degree. So I went to Kingston and did sports science, and absolutely loved it. Didn't think that was the end of the journey, or certainly didn't want it to be. And I considered all sorts of other options, of an army career after that, and very fortunately managed to get onto a clearing place at St George's Hospital Medical School to do physiotherapy, something that I didn't have the grades to when I was a youngster, certainly well above my academic potential, or I thought at the time. And again, really enjoyed that. That became a huge passion of mine. And again, when I finished that, I didn't want it to be the end of certainly of my academic pathway. So I did a master's degree in sport and exercise rehabilitation at St Mary's University, and ingrained myself in the culture there, and then continued to guest lecture and do some bits and pieces, and then started a PhD under the university 10 years ago. And that's been largely based within rugby and in head injury management, concussion, particularly in youth cohorts. So over the last 5 years now, I've been working with the RFU as a research consultant to help them look into some of the behaviour change aspects and educational pathways for concussion. And alongside all of that, I've been working in private practice ever since I qualified as a physiotherapist, and that's been both in a sporting context within rugby, but also in a wider musculoskeletal clinic, and that I will see anyone who walks in the door who's got some sort of movement impairment, dysfunction, pain, you name it. So over the years I've worked in so many different fields, and it's just been an amazing journey, and I've met so many brilliant exercise professionals like yourself who I've worked with, who have taught me so much, and hopefully I've passed on some information. And as a community, it's an amazing environment to work in, and there's nothing better than giving people the value of movement, which is so important to people's lives. So it's been a journey, and it's not finished yet. I don't know what I'm going to do now, so some more publications to come out, we'll see where it goes.
Okay, so just sort of backtracking a little bit on your time with the RFU the last 5 years, and you've mentioned to me previously, but certainly some publications that you've been a part of and that you're working on. Is there anything that we can specifically look forward to in the rugby community that might be released in the near future, or is there anything you can give us?
I mean, concussion's a massive topic at the moment, and it's quite controversial. There's some papers that should be released in the summer, which was a large-scale study of concussion knowledge and attitude of youth rugby players in the school system, because we need to get a better understanding of how they think and feel about concussion in order to create better ways of changing their behaviour. So those publications will be coming out. There's lots of other bits and pieces in the pipeline as well. So yeah, it's exciting stuff, and it's kept me busy over the last few years, certainly.
I suppose the worrying thing with any contact sport, especially rugby, and I know that the NFL looked into it quite a lot as well, with the links with concussion and then delayed onset, mental illness, mental disease, more mental illness sort of later down the line. So massive credit for that, and really look forward to reading that, and we will bring that to you as soon as it's out. So me and Dave, we're gonna do like a little series. We're gonna do more of a rugby specific series, and more rehabilitational work and conditioning work, and how you can apply that to your own training to prevent sort of any injuries. But like if we're on the topic of injuries, I guess what would be the most common things that you would see in a rugby player, like based on your time at Cobham or Broncos or?
Yeah, I mean, rugby is a collision sport, so you get a lot of the collision-based injuries. We see a lot of shoulder-related issues, knee rotational issues, ligament problems around the knees, hands and wrists. Obviously concussion is the most frequent injury that we see in rugby at the moment, unfortunately. But it's a whole variety of things really, and any medic that works in rugby is going to be used to having to deal with a whole host of different things because it is just so varied.
Amazing. So we're going to take that as a team, and we're going to bring you some training sessions that you can do and apply to, again, your own session at home or any gym that you're at, that can help at least limit the likelihood of that injury occurring during a game or a training phase. I know, like, we're speaking of my time when I was at Common, don't get to play much anymore, but I tended to pick up more injuries during training than I did during a game. Maybe that more of the relaxed atmosphere in training that could have been part of it, but that's just from my personal experience. But like, again, Dave became my mentor heavily when I met him at Cobham, but I went through a 2-year period, I think from the age of 26 to 28, 29, where I had 3 meniscus tears on my right knee, an ACL rupture which neither one of us knew about, but eventually was found on the 3rd meniscus repair, a full left ankle reconstruction, 2 perforated discs, S1, L5, L5, L4, and a few other things in between. So Dave realistically has kind of been my saviour in training, and if I listened to any of the surgeons and said, oh, I'd never lift weights again, I wouldn't be lifting weights now, and yet I'm stronger than I ever have been before, bar my wrist injury. So that leads us to, nicely, we're going to give you a little introduction and show you exactly what Dave does on a day-to-day basis, and we're going to use the advantage of me currently busting my wrist, you would have seen in the last video, and Dave's just going to go through a little bit of a process to see if he can determine what exactly could be wrong without any imaging, obviously, because we don't have that ability here. But Dave, over to you.
Injury is that we want to understand the mechanism of injury and how it happened in the first place. So what you've described to me was that there's a hyperextension of that wrist pattern. As the bar's gone back, it's loaded that structure into its maximal end range. That's going to give us an idea of which structures are likely to be involved. Ideally, we would have a video of these things, and sometimes from a sports perspective we do get the opportunity, and that's great for someone like me. But we've got to consider, well, what's then the symptom? How does it express? How has it felt? And again, that's going to give us a good understanding of which structures might be involved. So you've described, Luke, that you've had some neural symptoms, so some tingling, some pins and needles. A lot
of neural. It initially started through the middle finger and my thumb, where it was just a constant pins and needles, typically at the tips, not all the way through the finger itself. The most amount of my pain or discomfort has actually come at night, and I get shearing pins and needles all the way through my arm and the whole of my hand, which I have to kind of sit through for about 15 and 20 minutes until it just eases off itself, because it's a bit debilitating in a way that I can't go into any neural sliding work to try and ease it off. And then through the radial side, just a lot of fluid build up here. So I know you probably wouldn't have seen the last video we did, but I actually caught the 115 kilo clean, but because of my head and the 120 crashing on me last year, I binned it when I probably shouldn't have done, and that's initially what caused the injury, me actually pushing the bar away instead of me sort of catching it. So I don't know if that information helps any. As the weeks have gone on, the pins and needles has actually eased off from my middle and thumb, but it's actually now moved to my index finger.
Yeah, which tells us a lot about which nerves are involved. We've got 3 primary nerves that travel down the arm into the hand, and they distribute to different areas, and it gives us an idea of which one's been involved. Now, what we've got to consider here is that have we got what we would call an extraneural concern, i.e. something that's compressing that nerve from the outside, and that can be fluid, swelling, bone, joint sort of pressure, or have we got an intraneural concern? Intraneural concerns are where we've essentially tractioned the nerves, called a neuropraxia, so we've stretched it hard. Now, we would deal with those in different ways. I suspect because of the hyperextension position you've got yourself into, we've got a bit of both going on. We've probably loaded that nerve really fast and hard, and that's given it a bit of a tug. And then we've also potentially, if we have got some ligament strain around the wrist joint itself, that can increase the fluid that's in that space, and the carpal tunnel is not particularly large at all, so any fluid that sits in and around the wrist can give us a distribution of nerve symptoms to the periphery, and also that can radiate up. So if we've got both of those things going on, our initial test would be to consider, have we got any particular traction, extraneural tension on the nerve. So what we do is it's called an upper limb neurodynamic test. So we'd be in this position with the hands. So we're going to be loading the nerve from the neck all the way along the arm. So if we were loading the median nerve, we would take the hand back into flexion, like that, drop the shoulder down. I'll be propping here, and we're going to fix that in that position. Now, I would then ask, any symptoms in that position? Do you feel anything through there? And then we would slowly start to extend the elbow. That's going to traction the nerve. And then I'd ask Luke to tell me when he feels that tension coming on back there. Now, I want to know, I'm going to keep the wrist still. If we lift the shoulder, if you hitch that shoulder up, does that take the tension off?
Yes.
Okay, so by taking the tension off here, it's affected what's gone on down here, even though I haven't moved that wrist. So that's clarified that we have got a nerve component that's going on, and it's likely all the way through that system. So what we would use in that case is a way of sliding the nerve. The nerves are quite dynamic. They need to slide, and they'll slide a good 4 or 5 millimeters through the carpal tunnel. So once we've done that, we think, right, have we got anything else that's extraneural? Well, clearly you can see this slight comparison. So I would compare it to the other side with Luke's wrist. And first, I'm just looking for definition, and you can see here that it's a little shinier, it's got a little less definition. You won't be able to see this, but it's got a little bit of warmth to it. And as you can see, we've got a little bit less bony prominences going on through here. Sometimes when it's subtle, it takes a bit of experience. If we flip the hand over, you can certainly see the difference in the nipping through here and the crease lines. We've lost some of that. So we've still got fluid. Now, considering the time scale since the injury, to still have a fluid build-up is potentially two things. We've either got some sort of joint arthropathy, that's an irritation to the joint because we've banged those joints down at the distal radius as we've gone back into those positions, or the nerve sensitization has increased fluid, because sometimes when you traction a nerve, by default you get a load of fluid popping in through the joint. So once we've got that, that's all the process that's going through my mind when I'm starting to look at this. We would then want to have a feel to see what's moving and what's not. Have we got any risk of some sort of underlying bony fracture that we have misdiagnosed? Now, you can crack the scaphoid when you go back into those hyperextensive positions. It's a common injury for punching. Rugby, it's not uncommon as well. You stub the hand into something through the thumb. So there is the potential that we've hyperextended and compressed one of the carpal bones through here, and that could be leading to it. So at this point in time, if we still haven't seen any reduction in the fluid, we might want to consider a plain film X-ray. Ironically, however, if you do that too acutely after the injury, if you go within a day, and you've got very subtle changes through the bone and we've compressed it, we might not see anything, because the only thing we're going to see on an image is a healing response, and that might not start until 5, 7, 10 days later. So that's something to consider if this is not settling down. We also want to consider the thumb joint. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is going through a process of elimination, and then Luke's going to give me feedback about which is the most tender structure still there. Now, 2 bones are going down. Radius rotates over the top, so we would want to be having a look at our rotational capability. And if I brace through the elbow, you can see that we've just got that little bit of reduction in supination. Is that painful as we do that? A little bit. Whereas if you compare it to the other side, we can get that elbow fixed and then the palm flat. So we know that radius is rotating over, so we've got a little bit of limitation through there. That wouldn't happen if we didn't have something going on above that wrist. So we want to have a little play through the distal radius and all the joint. It's got a bit of mobility there, but it's a bit what we would call boggy. It's a bit soft, and there's a lot of fluid sitting around that space. So considering the heat of this, the likely for compression, I suspect that it wouldn't be a bad thing to get some diagnostics on this. Initially that could be a plain film X-ray. Downsides with that is it's not necessarily going to show us what's gone on with the soft tissue structures, but it might give us a good indication as to why this is not settled, and maybe we have some sort of small compressive fracture through one of the carpal bones. And then we've got to consider that, can we get it to settle down? Now, Luke's job, he's naturally lifting, moving, picking up, pushing, demonstrating. It might be an opportunity that we would consider bracing it, just to offload it. Now, that's something that I'm reluctant to do for most patients, because we really don't want to restrict movement, because that's only going to reduce the function through the muscles up at the forearm. but it might give us an opportunity for that fluid to settle a little bit. But either way, we'd be going, right, this doesn't smell right, do we need to get this looked at and settle down? Then we can consider, if we've ruled out those things, how we're then going to progress our rehab.
There you go. So, guess I'm off for X-ray.
Well, in the circumstances, I think that it would be certainly wise to rule out bone involvement in those carpals, because that's where its tender is sitting above the joint now. And again, there's still that fluid response, and that's been lingering now for what's a good month, isn't it?
3 weeks.
Yeah. So it's been
about
quite
3
a while.
weeks, James.
And normally, a soft tissue injury like that, you might see some fluid sitting around it for 7-10 days, something like that, and then it'll dissipate. Now, it could be the fact that you just can't lay off on it, and that's what's continued it, or it could be purely neural. But either way, what I can't do is fully rule out something that's bony, and that would be a potential barrier to us rehabbing it in a conventional sense. So once that came back and it was clear, we go, right, okay, well, we've cleared that out, now off we go, and we can start to work more openly with our rehab.
Perfect. So I hope that gives you a bit of an insight in Dave's brain. Like, the guy is a pure genius. Although my referrals do not come lightly, but he has taught me so much, and he's been a big part of my career, and the different directions he sent me off. I'm going to go and get this X-rayed, and I will relay with Dave, but that will be conversations for another day. But let us know in the comment section, is there any questions you have that you might have for Dave, or is there any injuries that slightly more uncommon that you don't know how to treat and Dave might have an answer for you? Drop those in the comment box. But this is definitely going to be a series. I love working with Dave and always have. I don't know if he feels the same, but you know, whatever. But tomorrow we're gonna shoot some more content, but it'll be more me and him are gonna actually train, and we're gonna go through more of a conditioning session and ways to integrate, as I said before, ways to integrate some prehabilitational conditioning into your training that you can do at home to help limit any injuries that might come in training and on match day as well, for all you rugby players in the rugby community out there. But Dave, thank you so much for coming in today. As always, I learned so much from you. He's actually going to be doing some TPD for my team as well, which is going to be awesome. So James, you're going to have to come in and get your learn on, same with everyone else. And watch out for his content coming in the future too. So he'll have his own series, and he's getting his website and everything all off the ground. And yeah, definitely a brain to pick. But Dave, man, appreciate you coming in.
Pleasure.
Love you as always, and we will see you in the next one.